The Dalai Lama has said, if you want others to be happy, practice compassion. If you want to be happy, practice compassion. In our previous video, we saw how compassion is associated with what we've called being mode of mind, the state of mind also known as our soothing and affiliation emotional system. It's a state we typically access when we experience being deeply connected to a person we care about, when we feel in awe of the wonders and beauty of nature, or bringing ourselves to be grounded in the present moment, as we might do with meditation. So it's perhaps not too surprising that alongside teachings of mindfulness, there's a long tradition of including in the learning some form of instruction on loving kindness or compassion to self and to others. In recent years, the concept of compassion has been validated by neuroscience, which has come to recognize its importance, and is increasingly giving attention to compassion in terms of research. It turns out that cultivating and practicing self-compassion helps us gently face into the sort of stuff we might otherwise find difficult. This is important because mindfulness asks us to notice what's happening in the present moment. And in doing so, it has us pay attention both to the things we experience that are pleasant and the things we experience that are unpleasant. So what is compassion? Perhaps compassion may best be described as a sensitivity to the suffering of ourself or another person, with a commitment to alleviate and prevent it. It differs slightly from kindness, which I see as a desire to simply better the life of ourself or another person. But there's also an overlap between compassion and kindness, inasmuch as a desire to be free of suffering is usually accompanied by a desire for well-being and happiness. Strangely, compassion doesn't always get a good press. Some people seem to see it as being quite soft, weak, or simply nice in not a very good way, and therefore a trait to be avoided. And there seems to be a fear that if we're seen as being too compassionate, we're putting ourselves at risk of having people take advantage of us. Even though I myself struggled a good bit with compassion when I first came to applied mindfulness, I've now come to see it quite differently. So I'd like to suggest that compassion is not really for the weak or faint-hearted, and that very often it actually can require courage, even massive courage on our part. Consider for a moment a firefighter faced with a burning building that has become unstable in a blaze. He's made aware that there are children trapped inside who will almost certainly perish if he doesn't rescue them. So, despite the huge danger involved, he willingly puts his own life at risk to enter the building and save the lives of those precious, terrified kids. Clearly, at the same time, this is a wonderful act of compassion and also a deed of great bravery. This example also serves to highlight another significant truth. That is, for our fireman to have performed this valiant deed, he would have needed to have called on the intensive training he had received on his way to becoming a professional firefighter. So it's important for us to recognize that in order to help others, we might also need to first develop the necessary skills to do so. For example, should we not be able to swim, there's no point in us diving into deep water to save a drowning person. Another example that comes to mind is that of doctors and nurses. If their motivation is one of compassion, and more especially one that will have them work to alleviate the pain and suffering of the people they feel called to serve, it will take some years of training for them to be able to do the important work they hope to do. So, good intentions are not always enough. Sometimes we also need to spend time and effort acquiring the knowledge and developing the skills, and even the practices that will enable us to alleviate the distress and difficulties we see around us in the world. Arguably, this is just as much the case when we come to noticing distress and emotional difficulty within ourselves. So how might we go about preventing and alleviating our own inner suffering? Paul Gilbert, in his book Mindful Compassion, points out that our mind can get into all kinds of difficulty. Not so much because there's anything wrong with it, but just because of how it is. Gilbert suggests that cultivating self-compassion develops in us the kindness, support, and courage needed to take the sort of actions that promote flourishing and well-being in our world. Of course, our motivations, life goals, and the sort of person we'd like to be are instrumental in guiding and shaping our life. So should we consciously put compassionate motives like helping, caring for, and supporting ourselves and other people right at the center of our life, we might well expect there to be far-reaching results. Indeed, the inner shift that comes with this is likely to impact on the way we relate to ourselves, to others, and to our environment. As we learn to become more mindful and so increasingly aware of our experience in the moment, we become conscious of our motives and the role compassion can play in our life. And without any self-judgment, we begin to see how easily our good intentions can be derailed through self-focus. For example, when we are too caught up in materialism, anxiety, or anger. Also, we begin to recognize that despite an intention to achieve some goals that may be important to us, like for example a business outcome, getting fit or losing weight, we may not be putting in the necessary effort to bring them about. Gilbert tells us that compassion is something that emerges together with wisdom. And the wisdom we develop ensures that compassion is non-judgmental. Therefore, it is not adapted as a should or an ought to, or even us trying to be a nice person so that we're liked. Instead, it involves a sort of lightness of touch associated with being mode of mind. With mindfulness, we bring a gentle, non-judgmental awareness to our patterns of behavior. Then, with self-compassion, we become motivated to remove any suffering that might come with them. As we've seen, this process might well involve us training our brain in new skills by developing helpful practices or by adopting different habits. That's just part and parcel of our mindfulness journey. So how does it work in real life? There are just two aspects to the instruction. First, we see and understand how things are in the present moment, which is the wisdom and mindfulness aspect. And second, we are moved to do something about it, which is the motivation and compassion aspect. In their very simplest form, these are the dual anchors of applied mindfulness and compassion, not forgetting self-compassion at work. They are the practices that come to stabilize our emotions, our actions, and even our relationships. There's strong evidence to suggest that the more we cultivate them in our life, the more wisdom, contentment, and inner peace we are likely to enjoy. Expect life to be different.